welcome. This is chapter 1 of Art Forms, the Nature of Art and Creativity. We are going to talk about things like creativity. When it comes to this idea here, it is the ability to create as a special characteristic of humans. You can say that that is one thing that separates humans from the rest of the animals on the planet is we have a tendency to be more creative. You can say it's not really for the sake of just survival. You can say we are creative as a way to make ourselves happy. And art as a common experience, meaning that any kind of idea, anything that we do is related to art. And take a look at this first work here. You're probably wondering what it is. In this textbook, Art Forms, there's a lot of contemporary art. And what I mean by that is there is a lot of artwork that is fairly recent. So the 1960s up to present, that's what I mean by contemporary art. Not exactly the type of art that you're probably expecting. In other words, Picasso, Van Gogh, Da Vinci. You'll eventually see these artists, but not too much. Instead, this book actually covers a wide variety of different arts. So something that I ask students to do is to keep open-minded. And this work is by the artist Janet Etchelman. Her Secret is Patience, made in 2009. If you see the description below, it gives the artist's name, the title, the date in which it was made, also the materials used to make it, also the dimensions. So we can see that this work here is 100 feet in height, and the top diameter is 100 feet as well. So what is art? Art generally refers to things like music, theater, literature, and the visual arts. So things like drawing, painting, sculpture, film, architecture, and design. When it comes to art, it is a way to communicate beyond a verbal exchange. So us as humans, we actually depend a lot on discourse. We depend a lot on a vocal form of communication. We depend a lot on text. But when it comes to art, we're actually finding ways to communicate to each other outside of those normal things. So what is a work of art? It is the visual expression of an idea or experience formed with skill through the use of a medium. And so you're probably wondering, okay, yeah, I know what a work of art is. It's a drawing, a painting, sculpture, and so on. We don't often think of art as an experience. You can say that for you to enter a space and to feel different because of that space is a type of visceral experience. It's an experience connected to your emotions. And so it's a different type of art, not always the visual, but also the visceral. You'll see this term being used a lot, a medium. A medium is a particular material along with its accompanying technique. If we are talking about more than one medium, we're talking about media. And so when it comes to the medium, it is usually chosen by the artist to enforce the function of the work. So if we can think back at the Etchelman piece we looked at earlier, the Etchelman piece, she uses a flexible netting that responds to wind. And she does that purposely for the sake of creating a work of art that isn't exactly just staying in one place. Instead, it's it has a little bit more of a static appeal. It corresponds to the environment. If it is windy that day, it's going to vibrate a little. If it's raining, it'll push it around a little bit. So the artist does that on purpose to make the work of art a little bit more flexible. And so you'll see this term used a lot as well, mixed media. It describes art that is a combination of materials. So the etchement piece is actually flexible netting, it's wires, it is fluorescent lighting, and so it is also an example of mixed media. So we're going to talk a little bit about creativity. It is the ability to bring forth something new that has value. It is has a relevance or new way of thinking, and that it is not a novelty. Something about creativity, it has the potential to influence future thought or action. A lot of us when we are young, we say things like, oh, I'm not creative, or this is actually something that I hear a lot when I'm an adult. I would tell people that I study art, and they'll just think in their mind, whoa, why? No, I'm kidding. They will be curious, what can you get out of studying art? And I can tell you off the bat that it forces you to be very creative, and that's something that a lot of adults they don't really depend on that as they get older. And maybe one of you will find out that. But while you're still young, keep open-minded and stay creative. But anyhow, we can talk about things like art and making art in a future time. And so let's take a look at this work of art here. A series of photographs. And so you're probably looking at it and saying right away that, oh, okay, I see what's going on. There's a person that he is shooting a basketball. Actually, he's dribbling the ball, he's jumping up in the air, and he's doing this very dramatic slam dunk shot. But we are looking at the overall scene, that the background looks a little bit artificial. So it's actually drawn onto the blacktop. Sorry, we have the person draw onto the blacktop this fake scene, this background, especially with the basketball hoop in the net, and especially those lines of action. And so when it comes to creativity, we are accessing different ways to present ourselves, or we're accessing different ways to solve a problem. And this work here is by Robin Rohde. The title is He Got Game, made in 2000, 12 color photographs. And so this is one of the few lists that I ask my students to remember, the 5 traits that define creativity. And so the first one is associating. Associating is when someone makes connections with one thing to another. So you can say that Robin Rohde, he would associate himself with a actual basketball player. And of course he's exaggerating it. He's fantasizing about creating a particular scene, but he's making a connection between himself and another idea. Another trait that defines creativity is questioning. So if you are a creative person, you'll question many things. Why does it have to be this way? How do things work the way they do? If you question many things, you're probably automatically thinking of other ways to do something, or to do it differently, maybe to do it better. You are accessing your ability to be creative, to think beyond what is already given to you. Another trait that defines creativity is observing. So you have to be able to observe. You have to be able to stand aside and look and to watch and to learn and to study and to inscribe data. And so observing is a very important trait that defines creativity. Another one is networking. So networking is a little bit like associating in that you are connecting things, except for networking, it's more about accessing others. So if you are thinking of a way to do something, but you feel in your immediate state that you are unable, you're going to network, you're going to think outside of your current self, access those who are around you, and find ways to solve problems. So those who are creative, they are very good at networking. That's a skill that feels very natural, but at the same time, it's something that we must exercise. The more ability you have to network, the more things you'll actually be able to accomplish. So just think about that. Another trait that defines creativity is experimenting. Learning how to do things, but doing them in different ways. So we have this term of visual creativity, the use of imagery to communicate beyond words. You have to think beyond the use of a discourse. We have to think of visual ways to make a connection with others. And now let's take a look at this work of art here. So you're probably thinking right away that it is a very interesting composition. For the most part, it is very interesting because of the materials being used. If you guys can remember, that word is media. If you are going to think about works of art, I would think about the media or the medium used to create it. And in this case, you could probably guess that they are a series of photographs and magazine cutouts. And so we are looking at a scene that has very neutralized use of color, a lot of blacks and whites, so some interesting things happening in the background with the train. And we'll see a figure in the front of us. Also, that the figure, you can see his eye very, very well. You can see his arm outstretched, that the figure has wings of some sort. Next to the central figure is, it appears to be a female figure. And I'm just guessing from the shape of the the jawline and the lips and so on. So we have, looks like a male and a female, and that the man is holding a flower. And this work is by the artist Romer Bearden, Prevalence of Ritual Tidings, 1967. And so I actually have a few links, actually one link that deals with a lot of his work. I like for students to go beyond just my lecture to learn about different students. I want you to go beyond my lecture to learn about different arts. Even though I can give you a lot of information, you can say that it's a little bit more exciting when you hear it from different sources. So check out his work on the modules section of our Canvas page. So a little bit of information on Romer Bearden. He is born in 1911. He passed away in 88. He was inspired by jazz music. I'm hoping that a lot of my students are already listening to music. Maybe you have heard of jazz music before. If I were to describe jazz, it would be something like spontaneous or improvised, but that at the same time it's very structured. And that's what comes to mind when I think about jazz, that it's think of horns, think of percussions, think of a stand-up bass player. And so when it comes to the musicality, the idea behind jazz music is that it feels very improvised, but at the same time, it's very structured, almost like math. And so a lot of artists were actually inspired by jazz, especially during this time, or the artists around the mid 1900s for sure. Many of them are inspired by jazz. So listen to jazz when you can. Listen to big band jazz. Let me know how you like it. And so something about Romare Bearden, he is African American. His roots are of North Carolina, and that he had this idea of this fascination with the idea of homecoming. And here's another example of his work here. Rocket to the Moon, made in 1971. So this is a mixed media collage. So we'll talk about what a collage is eventually, but you can probably tell what it is already just from looking at this image. And so a little bit more about creativity, we're going to talk about artists. So different types of artists. They are trained artists and also untrained artists. For the most part, especially in the past, most artists became artists through an apprenticeship of some sort. So if you are familiar with Renaissance style artists like Michelangelo or Da Vinci, they all became artists through a mentor of some sort. And so at one point in time, they were all apprentices, and that's how they acquired their skill, basically from a mentor. So that's how it was in the past. And not just the Western world, not just in Europe or the Americas, but in many different cultures, there are apprenticeships. So in today's standards, they are very different. Instead, we have things like art schools or colleges and universities where artists are picking up a artistic skill, and that these skills are passed down from generation to another generation. And actually, a lot of the art that is being taught at a university, or at an American college or European college, you could say a lot of the art has been passed down through generations. And so something about being an artist is that it's not exactly necessary to undergo a type of training or apprenticeship to become one. There are many cases where people are just naturally gifted at being creative. They can see things just as good as any artist, but they didn't undergo any training. Does it make it more difficult? Yes, but technically anyone can acquire the skill if they have the correct, discipline. And so there are trained artists, there are untrained artists, there are also folk artists. Folk are naive or outsider artists, and that many of them have little or no formal training. When it comes to folk artists, you could say for the most part they are learning that through a type of apprenticeship, but it's not exactly a formal apprenticeship. It's more like a familial connection, maybe grandmother to granddaughter or something like that. So you're probably wondering, what is an outsider artist? An outsider artist is someone that basically they can make work, but they're not exactly recognized in the realm of art. And with that being said, you can imagine how, say, exclusive the art community can be. They can be very snobby. You can become popular just from knowing the right people. And so that's something that is quite interesting about the art world, and we can talk a lot about that in a future chapter. And now let's take a look at this work of art here. Actually, we're just looking at a silhouette image. It doesn't exactly give it justice to the actual structure. So check out the video that I posted, that I actually found on YouTube, of a helicopter view of this structure here. And it's actually pretty magnificent. It's magnificent to think that this work of art was made without any power tools. It was made during the early 1900s. It took the artist 30 years to create, and this piece is by Sabatino Simon Rodia. The piece is called Nuestro Pueblo, or Our Town. The casual name, the everyday name is the Watts Towers. In other words, it is from Watts, California in the Los Angeles area. And so this piece was made from putting together a lot of found objects. In other words, a lot of objects that were just randomly in the neighborhood or within the artist's home. So he would piece this large structure day by day. So it's actually very tall, 100 feet. And here is a detailed view of one section of Nuestro Pueblo. And you can see how intricate the design and the patterns turned out. To imagine only one person put this together. And he did all of this without any power tools, without any fancy technology. He just went out there and put this thing together one by one. And here's another example of the type of outsider art. And actually, let me go back a little bit about the Watts Tower. One of the reasons why it is so popular is that the Watts Tower was made by the artist Simon Rodia. Oops. Let me go back here to the larger picture, and that people would see it and they would be fairly amazed, but critics would come by and say, okay, why is this piece out here? Why is it getting so much attention? Because it is made by an unknown. So he shouldn't be getting this type of attention. And so because of that idea, he's labeled as a type of outsider artist. And I go back in a chapter like that. I'm guessing it's going to be on the quiz or the exam. So look out for that. Get to know the Watts Tower. And so back to where I left off, we are looking at another object that was made by a type of outsider artist. This is by the Philadelphia Wiremen. And you're probably wondering, well, that doesn't sound like a person's name. Well, the reason why is they don't know who the actual person is. And this piece is called The Untitled Watch Face, made around 1970. They don't know the exact time when it was made. They don't know the exact creator. These were actually found in a vacant home. More than 1,000 size sculptures of small objects wrapped in wire. So imagine thousands of these in an abandoned house. Why were they made? Nobody knows. And despite that, it gained a lot of attention. They are guessing the creator is a man because back then there weren't really many power tools that you can use to bend and manipulate wires. So it looks like it was made, barehanded. And so this is another example of a outsider work of art. And so let's take a look at this piece here. This is done by a different style of artist. And this is a type of folk art. So we are looking at a scene here, a painting on a wooden panel. I am seeing a scene on the right. I am looking at men in uniform. It looks like they have guns, rifles, and it looks like they are arresting somebody. And on the left, we have it looks like a family praying to Jesus on the cross. And there's a lot of text underneath. And this is called a retablo, made in 1915, so over 100 years ago. A retablo is a type of offering. And what I mean by offering is the artist that made this piece made it as a type of gift or an offering to God. And so the story behind this piece is that a man was accused for stealing and that he was to be executed. And so his family prayed for him, and in doing so, he was found innocent, and that he was let go, and that his life was saved, and he is grateful to his family to pray for him, and that helped him prove his innocence, and he was able to live again. And so these are a type of offering, these retablo paintings. It is an example of a folk art. Okay, so get to know those. And now here's a different type of artist, and let's look at it for a moment. And right away you can say, yeah, that looks like a kid's drawing. If you have kids at home, you probably have seen pictures that look like this. Maybe not as detailed, but relatively close. Maybe, who knows? Maybe it was drawn by a grown-up. And so this is called Grandma by the child artist Alana, age 3. And so we're still talking about trained and untrained artists. You can say that children have an intuitive sense of composition. They are born to feed. They are born to cry. They are born to, what else? To crawl. Eventually, they're going to draw. That's one of the first skills that children develop at a very young age. And, I have children at home, so I think, yes, around 2 or 3, for sure, they just notice you can pick something up and make marks with it. And it's not like, maybe we can show them, and of course they can learn that way, but I've seen some cases where they just see a crayon and it seems like they already know what to do. But yes, children are born with a very intuitive sense of composition, and that they depict the world symbolically until about the age of 6. They begin to doubt their creativity by age 9 or 10. So something interesting about that idea is, as we grow older, we have a tendency to create expectations for ourselves. And if we see something that looks very nice, and right away we think, wow, that person's really good, I can't do that. I don't think I can do that. But yes, people start to lose that sense of confidence when it comes to using their creativity at a very young age, and that's not exactly good. It's actually a lot better if many of us maintain that ability to be creative. And so, some very interesting things to think about. I have students who are, 18, in between 18 and 30, and most of them are very humble about their ability to draw. But, many people have it. They just haven't really used it. And so we're going to talk about some terminology when it comes to describing works of art. We are going to talk about representational art. They depict the appearance of things. I like to say that representational art depicts the appearance of recognizable things. So if we see something in a painting or a drawing or a sculpture and that we know what it is supposed to be, then that is representational art. If there's a person in it, we recognize that it's a person. It is representational art. If it's a landscape, if it is a scene of beautiful mountains and clouds and anything else that we recognize in nature, that is representational art. Whenever the human form is the primary subject, in other words, it is the main idea behind the whole painting, then we call it a figurative art. A lot of figurative arts are very popular. So whenever we talk about the subject, we are talking about objects that are depicted in representational art. And so we are looking at a painting here. It is very representational. Well, it is representational to me because I know what these objects are. We are looking at a pipe with some matches. We have a bag of tobacco on a tabletop, and also it looks like on top of a newsprint paper. And so because they are objects that I recognize, we can right away say it is representational. And this painting is actually very realistic. It's almost like a photograph. So these real looking paintings, we call that in French, we say trompe l'oeil, fool the eye in English. And so this piece is called A Smoke Backstage by William Harnett, made in 1877. And now let's take a look at this representational painting. And so we are looking at a painting, another painting of a pipe, except that that's all we are seeing here, a pipe. But underneath it, it says in French, ceci n'est pas une pipe. Ceci n'est pas une pipe. This is not a pipe in English. So we are looking at a painting, and that we are seeing the pipe, but underneath it says this is not a pipe. So what is that all about? And so the viewer may wonder, if it is not a pipe, what is it? The answer is, it is a painting. And this is by the artist Rene Magritte. So it's a little bit of a trick question. You're probably wondering why it's so popular. Rene Magritte and many artists around his time, many surrealist artists, they make art that make people see things differently. And that's why they're fairly important. And how here we have the same work of art, except done in a different form, a different composition. It is Ceci n'est pas une pipe, made with dollar bills. And so this is by Ray Beldner, and this work is about this complicated relationship between art and reality. In other words, if you think about the art world in general, especially in today's standards, many people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, for some very valuable works of art. And what I mean by valuable is that people are willing to spend so much money. But if you think about it in terms of its material, you could say that the actual material worth is something in the amount of these dollar bills that we are looking at. So in a way, the artist is communicating this idea of mocking what people consider as valuable. He's mocking this idea of consumerism and how people are willing to spend so much money just to own things. And so now we're going to talk about abstract art. Abstract art, they are works that have no reference at all to the natural objects. They are actually works that depict natural objects in simplified, distorted, or exaggerated ways. And I feel that is the better definition. The second paragraph, the second sentence here, they depict natural objects in simplified, distorted, or exaggerated ways. So if you think about the word abstract on its own, it actually means to borrow, or that it's borrowing from something. And so when it comes to abstract works of art, there may be some hints that they are recognizable, but they are simplified, they are distorted and exaggerated. Sometimes the viewer needs a clue, a verbal clue to help translate what's happening. Abstract art is common in many cultures, and we're about to find that out pretty soon. And I'm going to pause for my recording just for now. And I am back. We are still talking about abstract art. I'm going to show you an example of abstract art here. So we're looking at a type of folk art. It's a type of indigenous art from the Cameroon area in Africa. So we're looking at very abstract figures. And what I mean by that is that there are the human form is present here. but at the same time, it's not exactly naturalistic. Instead, it's very exaggerated, especially with the width of the arms and how rigid they appear. Some of the edges of the musculature feel very stylized, and so we are looking at abstract figures here. And this is called the chief's stool, made during the late 19th and 20th century. And this is called the chief stool from Cameroon, the people representing the community that supports the chief. So very interesting. We are looking at figures, multiple figures, upholding whoever is seated on this chief stool. So it's very symbolic in that way. And here is an example of the abstraction of a cow. It's an example of how artists can make a abstract work of art, because when it comes to abstract art, you can probably wonder, where do they find these inspirations from? How do they get from one point to another? And this is actually going to be one of your first studio projects. I want you to mimic something that is happening here. And what I mean by that is, don't Google something and just copy it. You have to be creative, and you gotta find a way to make your own version. Okay, so pay attention to this section here, because I'm gonna ask you to do your first studio project off of this series of images. So we are looking at Van Doesburg and the abstraction of a cow. How far can he simplify a cow while still capturing its essence? And so the first image here, we see a early sketch of a cow. It's fairly representational, a lot of gestural loose lines. And when it comes to your own project, and I hope that you find a subject that interests you, that you draw it out. And you can be as sketchily as you like. You don't have to make it too representational. It doesn't have to have 100% accuracy, but you should give yourself a good idea of what the original object looks like. So this is stage one of the abstraction. And now this is stage two. And what you can see is happening here is the artist Van Doesburg gets the regular shapes from the original animal and he simplifies them, basically creating triangles and rectangles and squares from the original object. And so he's still maintaining the essence of the original. And so does it still look like a cow? Yes, I feel like I can still see it in many ways. And some interesting things happening. He is shading where the areas are usually dark. And so I want you to do something like this as well. You're actually going to turn in 4 pictures. So you're going to have this original sketch, then you're going to have an abstraction of it like this. And now we're going to look at stage 3. The artist does the same thing, except that the artist adds color. And so the artist here using tempera as his medium of choice. And so the shapes are relatively the same from his second sketch, except that he adds some green, white, black, yellow, blue, and orange. And so this is something that I'm going to look forward to seeing with your works of art as well. And so here is the finalized version. The work is called Composition 8, The Cow, from the abstraction of a cow, made in 1918. So this work of art, this series of works, was made over 100 years ago. And so in the end, the work is very, very abstract. I have no idea what it is anymore. But there are still some hints and clues of the original shape, especially when I see where the orange is in the lower right-hand corner. That was the same orange that was on the previous image. And then the black rectangle adjacent to that rectangle, that looks like it's from the original image as well. And and especially with the other two rectangles. So it still maintains the essence of the original shape. So that's what I'm hoping you guys are going to be able to do with your first studio art project. And now we're going to talk about non-representational art. Sometimes they are called non-objective or non-figurative. They are non-objective because there's no specific reference to anything outside of themselves. There's no objective in that. It's very difficult to tell what direction the artist is going in terms of his content. When it comes to non-representational art or non-objective art, it is something similar to music, as in the pure sound forms of music. These are just things that we can listen to and that we can interact with emotionally. It's not something that is tangible, that we can touch and that we can physically mimic. So non-representational art or non-objective art has that same type of appeal in that we are basically generating our own interpretations. Same thing when we listen to music, especially music without words. And so here is an example of non-representational art, non-objective art. In other words, there aren't exactly any references to the natural world that is being depicted here. If there are, then those types of interpretations are very individualized. One person can look at it and say, wow, this looks like just a series of dashes. Some people can look at it and say it looks like holes on a wall. And this work of art here is called The Gray Night Phenomenon by Alma Woodsey Thomas, made in 1972. So it is non-representational art, but the artist actually, through her text, gives us a clue of what the painting might be about. Gray Night Phenomenon. So I'm just curious to how many of us saw this piece and right away thought about a night sky. Maybe some of us. If you look at the dimensions of this piece, it's very large, 68 inches by 53. So it's a very tall painting. And when it comes to works of art in this magnitude, it's very hard to not like because of the scale. It feels different than a very small painting. And now if we look at this work of art here, jumping around in terms of the time and the culture, we looked at a fairly a painting from the 1900s. Now we're looking at a more indigenous work of art. This is a type of folk art. And this has a combination of non-objective shapes, also abstraction, but who knows, it might be representational. And this is from a culture from the oceanic area, the Maori people in New Zealand. And this is called the tukutuku panels. And we have a series of geometric panels, and each panel represents certain elements. So from what I can remember, the diamonds refer to the plant life, and that some of these shapes here refer to the mountains. And so the Maori people, they look at these patterns and they are actually symbolic of something that is necessary for their livelihood. And so the creatures that are in between, those are something that we're going to talk about in more detail when we talk about the indigenous works of art from the oceanic area. I actually have a colleague that is an expert, and we're going to be able to talk to him about these kinds of works. He knows a lot more than I do. And so these creatures here, they are a type of ancestor deity. And so I don't want to spoil it for a future chapter. So look forward to that. And so again, we're looking at a series of of abstraction and non-objective all combined. And so we're going to talk about a different idea here. We're talking about looking and seeing. Looking is when we imply taking in what is before us in a very mechanical or goal-oriented way. So when you look at something, you know what it is, you can label it, and you just store it in your brain, and you don't even think about it anymore. Like right now, I'm in my little extra room office / studio virtual classroom. And so I have a mirror in front of me. I have a camera tripod. I have my desk. I have my file cabinet, and all of these things I can just look at, and I know what they are, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. I know what these things are. I don't need to spend that much time thinking about them anymore. And that's what looking is about. When it comes to seeing, we are looking, but with more receptive, and we are more open, and we are more focused. So when we are seeing something, we're going beyond these things like a type of utility. We are looking at it in a more aesthetic way. We are looking at the visual qualities. When we are seeing something, we are looking with memories, imaginations, and feelings attached. And so if I were to go back and see some of these things around me, and if I were to see them with a little bit more open-mindedness, I can say that, oh yeah, the mirror in my room it has a very elegant appearance. It's very soft. There's actually a white line, a white border around my mirror, and that light changes the amount of lighting coming out of the reflection, and that it has a very, say, modern feel, very geometric. It's very simplified, just like a lot of things in modern culture, modern architecture. And so I am looking at it with a little bit more focus. What else? I can talk about my file cabinet, that instead of just looking at it and telling myself, okay, yeah, that's a file cabinet, I can look at it and say, this too has a very elegant design. It is very sleek. It is a very mechanical, but it just has this ability to match with everything around me. And my room is primarily white and black because I like white and black furniture. And so I'm looking at it with a little bit more intention. I'm being a little bit more receptive. That's what the difference is between looking and seeing. So when it comes to appreciating works of art, you want to be able to see it more instead of just to look at it in a very mechanical way. And so let's take a look at this photograph here. And maybe some of you can guess what is the medium of this piece. And if I tell you, it might make a little bit more sense of what the medium is. It's actually a photograph of a vegetable. And so with that being said, I can tell myself that this is a vegetable, and it is a vegetable on a table, and yay. And I'm just going to ignore it now. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to try to see it with a little bit more receptivity. I'm going to see it for its visual characteristics. There's a lot of really strong uses of contrast, especially the darks, and that is balanced off of the amount of strong highlights that I am looking at. So this overall photograph has very strong balance, very light lights, very dark darks, but then we have these transitions from light to dark that really allow for my eye to shift from one section of the photograph to another. So when it comes to looking at these works of art, when we are seeing it differently, we are noticing that whatever is normally ordinary suddenly becomes extraordinary. When it comes to the process of seeing, it is different for every person. So not everyone experiences this type of process. Everyone has their own levels of their attention, their temperament, their ability to sit and study something. And so we're going to talk about form and content. Form is the total effect of the combined visual qualities within a work. You could say that form includes things like the materials. We're talking about colors. We're talking about shapes, lines, and design. On the other hand, we have content. Content is the message or meaning of a work of art. It is what the artist expresses to the viewer. And let's take a look at this piece here. Let's talk about the form first. So we're talking about the things like materials. We're talking about things like shape. This material is marble. We're talking about the shapes. They are human. They are very naturalistic. At the same time, they are very smooth. The marble finish is very smooth. There are areas that are very rough, and what we're looking at in terms of the rough part, the lower portion, that the rock that they are sitting on, that's actually the natural rock on its own, opposed to the finished marble, the polished and chipped way to render marble. And so that is the form. When it comes to the content, or what is the message, you could say that the artist is making work about relationships or about love. And of course, we are thinking that right away because we have a couple here, and that it looks like they are romantically engaged in a kiss, and it seems like they are into it, and that that's what the content is about. And this is by Auguste Rodin. The piece is called The Kiss, made in 1886. And now here is another example of a sculpture, and let's talk about the form here. The form here looks very similar to the previous sculpture in terms of the color, in terms of the material. It looks like marble as well. It could be something else. But when it comes to the shape, this looks somewhat human-like, but very abstract and very simplified. And so the form is very different. But when it comes to the content, if I were to study it for a moment, it looks like abstract people facing each other. It looks like they are basically kissing each other, or their arms are embraced, and that the content is very similar to the last one. And this is by another artist. His name is Constantin Brancusi, and the title is also called The Kiss, made in 1916. There's a lot of works of art named The Kiss. And so if you were to compare these two works of art side by side, you can say that the form is very different. One is very naturalistic, it's very idealized, it is very perfect, it's very representational. On the other side, we have a sculpture that is more on the side of abstraction, in that the material is the same, but because of its abstraction, the meaning feels a little bit more ambiguous. We have to dig away at the meaning, and sometimes that makes the overall message stronger. Would you say that? Would you agree with me that sometimes if the message is something that we can grasp right away, of course we can sympathize with it, we can identify it, but if it's something that we have to dig and spend time discovering, then it actually makes the feeling a little bit more worthy of the amount of time we're spending looking at the piece. So abstract art has that same kind of effect, that when you ponder and you're dwelling on a particular piece because of its abstraction, then it forces you to feel something differently. And so when it comes to seeing and responding, the artist is the sender of the work's message. The viewer must receive and experience the work, and we are learning to respond to form. When it comes to looking at works of art, it's not something that we can right away translate or to understand. We actually have to spend time achieving that sense of open-mindedness, that we are accessing information that makes sense to us. So subject matter can interfere with the perception of form. In this example here, you can ask yourself, is this representational? Is it abstract? Is it non-objective? And this is a little bit more on the side of abstraction. It looks like something that we may recognize. And this piece is called Jack in the Pulpit #5 by Georgia O'Keeffe, made in 1930. And what the artist does here is she gets a flower. So she gets a flower, she looks at the flower. Instead of just painting it straightforward, she actually zooms in very, 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 very close to one small section of the flower, and she paints it very large on this material, on this canvas. It's an oil painting on canvas. Very large painting, 48 inches by 30 inches, so about 4 feet tall. And when the abstract work of art is on a larger scale like this, it just feels outside of the norm when it comes to looking at works of art. And now we're going to talk about iconography. Iconography is a set of subjects, symbols, motifs used in an image to convey its meaning. Not all works contain iconography. So whenever we look at a work of art and there are things that we might recognize and that these things give us meaning, then we call that iconography. So let's take a look at this example here. We are looking at a religious work from the Christian religion. And maybe some of you can look at the overall piece and right away identify what some of these motifs and what are these iconographies that we recognize. So in the center, we have Mary, that she's often portrayed with the baby Jesus on her lap. She's sometimes portrayed with a crown because she is the Queen of Heaven. You'll see her with a halo symbolizing her divinity. There are angels around her. There is a dove above Mary's crown. The dove symbolizes the Holy Spirit, if you are familiar with Christianity. Above the dove is the Father in heaven, and that he is holding a globe, and that globe has a cross on it. And so we go back to Mary. Underneath her we have another set of angels. Something that you'll notice is these angels are fairly large. They are also wearing armor, and that they are also wearing these large drapes, these large red drapery, and that usually means that the angel is probably an archangel or a higher ranked angel, such as Michael or Gabriel, and so one of the angels is carrying a person upward and leading him up. You'll see that the angel's finger is pointing to the upper left corner, and that these people are being pulled out of these flames, perhaps representing the purgatory, where people are judged. So a lot of iconography here, a lot of things that you may or may not recognize. And this is called the Virgin of Carmel, Saving Souls in Purgatory, by the Circle of Diego Quispetito. Oil painting made in the late 17th century. Very large painting. And here, I'm going to ask you, you're probably recognizing who this is. And if some of you are thinking Buddha, then good job. But how did we know that it was Buddha? What are some of the characteristics that give it away that he is Buddha? Well, Buddha, or we can say this incarnation of Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, that was his name before he was dubbed enlightened to be Buddha. And so he is recognized by his position and how he is seated. He is sitting in a lotus position, a type of Indian stance or Indian seating. That's what we called it when we were kids. We can say that his arms are in a prayer type of pose or a meditative type of pose. He's always wearing very soft fabric, very loose fabric. It looks as though he's floating. You'll always see Buddha with his eyes closed. He's always portrayed in a meditative state. And that he's always portrayed with the head bun. You'll notice that his head, he has his hair tied on the top. And that is to recognize his level of enlightenment. Something about Buddha as well. He is often portrayed with elongated earlobes. And so the story behind Buddha, the story behind Siddhartha Gautama is that he was actually of royalty. He was a prince destined to become the next king of his community. And so something about Siddhartha Gautama is that he lived a very sheltered life growing up because he was of royalty. He wasn't allowed to leave the palace and mingle with commoners. But the very few times he was able to go out, he would right away notice the differences. He would notice that the people around him were fairly poor, and that the people around him were sick, and that he felt like it wasn't exactly fair to him to live a life the way he does. And so he actually chose to live away from that. He actually ran away, and he lived life as a hermit, basically. He lived in a cave without these luxuries to find out what makes people happy. And so because of the things that he did in his life, people followed him, and they were able to find happiness through that lifestyle. And that's why he's one of the most influential people. I could say that Buddhism is what, the third largest religion in the world. And so yes, and so we are looking at this, and the iconography is what leads us to guess what the message is about, guess who this work is supposed to be about. In this case, we have Buddha. And if you see Buddha, he's always portrayed with some sort of plant life around him. So you'll see that a lot when it comes to the Buddha. And so, yes, this is called the Amida Buddha, made in the 12th century. And another example of iconography can be seen here, except this is a little bit more on the contemporary side. In other words, popular culture. And in this case, we have a painting palette with some text on it. I am an artist. My art is assaulting people. There's a picture of a baseball bat, and it looks like a weapon, a hatchet of some sort, maybe Native American. On the palette is a printed photograph of some classic or some wrestlers from the past, and one of the figures has a bulldog on his face. And so this is a different kind of iconography, more based off of popular culture. And this was made in 1997 by Alexis Smith. The piece is called Black and Blue. For Howie Long, a defensive lineman in the NFL. His most famous statement on an artist palette with a photo of wrestlers and weapons. So this is a different kind of iconography. Again, not the same. The idea is similar in that there are these hints and clues. And this is about popular culture, which is sports. And so that is it for this chapter. I hope you made it all the way through to the end. If you did, congratulations. Use these PowerPoints as a way to study for the exams. And let me know if you have any questions. And take care.